Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our June 2026 episode of Plants, Pests and Pathogens. I'm Ariyah April, the Program Assistant for the NC State Extension Master Gardener Program. Today, we have another fun and interesting topic, garden myths and misconceptions with Matt Bertone and Mike Munster. After the main presentation, Matt and Mike are going to dive into our BOLOs, or the plant pests and diseases to be on the lookout for this season. And then we're going to wrap up with today's Plant Bees for Pollinators feature on Rudbeckia by Charlotte Glen, the program manager for our statewide Extension Master Gardener program. Charlotte is also going to update us with a few EMG program announcements, so please stay tuned for those. Before we get started, this is a friendly reminder that next month's PPP is going to be extra fun. In our webinar on August 25th, Matt and Mike are going to solve some of your plant pests and disease problems. So please submit your questions and your photos for Matt and Mike to review. You're going to use this photo submission form, and we're going to drop the photo submission form link in the chat in just a moment. But please submit your questions and photos by Tuesday, August 11th, because that gives Matt and Mike some time to review them. Now, you're going to want to submit your photos that are in focus and that clearly exhibit the problem. And in the photo, please include a common object, like in this photo you see, it's a thumbnail, and that indicates the size of the insects or the symptoms. And you do need to have a free Google account to submit your photos through the Google form. We're going to jump into our main presentation today, Garden Myths and Misconceptions. Our presenters are Matt Bertone and Mike Munster of the NC State Plant Disease and Insect Clinic. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
All right. Thanks, Ariyah. Thanks, Charlotte. We'll begin sharing the screen. All right. Everyone can see this now, hopefully. And yeah, so Mike and I are excited to present some garden myths and misconceptions. These are things that you may have heard of, you may have never heard of, but basically how we're going to do it today is that we will present a popular or more niche perception people have about things in the garden. You'll have a chance to say whether it's a myth, for example, or that is a legend, a wives' tale, misconception, etc., or it's true. And we will then explain whether it is or is not true. And so we will post a little poll. We're going to give you about 20 seconds to answer. It's only one of two choices, myth or true, and then we'll go into it. So I will be driving the bus on this, but Mike and I will both be presenting. And so if everyone's ready, we will go with the first one because we got several to get through. All right. So, everyone, the first one is ants help peony flowers open up. Hopefully, you're seeing a little poll pop up. Is this a myth? Is this a fact? So, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. We have 64% of people think it's a myth and 36% of people think it's a fact. All right, so let's see what the answer is. So, the answer is it is a myth, unfortunately. Ants are not needed for the blooms to open. They will open on their own, but there is a relationship between the peonies and the ants. The ants are attracted to extrafloral nectaries produced by the plant. So when the flower bud is closed, there's these little bits of sugary nectar that come out. And this attracts the ants and it helps the plants because the ants will chase away pests and other things. So it is useful for the plant. It is useful to the ants because they get a nice quick food source. You can see this one down here feeding on that. But without the ants, the flower will still open up. And once it does bloom and opens up, the nectaries stop producing the food and the ants are not going to be as attracted anymore. So that is a myth. All righty. And feel free to put your questions in the chat or anything like that. We'll come back and answer them near the end. But the next one is for Mike.
Watering foliage on a bright sunny day will cause sunburn on leaves. Myth or fact?
And as you're going along, feel free to keep score if you really want to know how you did. You may do really well by the end, or maybe you might not want to keep track. But this is all fun. We're all learning.
And yeah, because of the number that we want to get through, we're only going to limit to about 20 seconds or 30 at most for people to put in their opinion. So have your hand right on the buzzer there.
And Mike, let me know if you want me to end it and share or if you want to do it. Maybe for
Oh,
yours, you could do it if you feel like it. Yeah.
all right, will do. Okay, so are you seeing the results there? I put share.
I do. I'm hoping other people do see it out there.
So we have 43% say myth, 57%.
Okay. Well, I'm going to stop sharing now and reveal and go to the next slide. So,
All right.
okay, Mike, if you want to explain, just tell me when to go. Keep going.
Yeah, click once there. So this is the kind of theory behind the statement or the belief that somehow the water droplets are able to focus the sun's rays and cause the burn on the leaf, either through heating or through some kind of just photo effect on the plant. There are kind of two ideas there, but it turns out that this is actually a myth. So if we go to the next slide, what's really interesting is that nobody actually looked into this seriously until just this century. And there was a paper published in 2010 in New Phytologist, and in a comment about that paper, the statement summarizing it was this: that although glass beads were shown to readily induce sunburn symptoms, sunburn could only be obtained with water droplets, where the droplets were held above the leaf surface on hydrophobic hairs, as in Salvinia. In other leaves, the focusing effect of the water drops was inadequate to cause detectable tissue damage. So basically, the water droplet doesn't stay on there long enough to cause this effect, and you'll have the evaporation occurring and the water droplet's shape changing. It becomes less of a good lens. So it doesn't happen. With this one exception in that study, they looked at a species of Salvinia, and the picture on the next slide here shows a different species, but you get the idea. This, by the way, is an invasive plant. Don't plant this. But if you look at the close-up, there are these very strange hairs on the surface of the leaf, and we'll just imagine, go ahead and click there, how a water droplet could be held up above it there, and you might get that effect happening. But in our ordinary plants that we would have in the garden, this would not be actually a thing to worry about.
All right. Thanks, Mike. All right. Next one. Earwigs try to enter people's ears to get to their brains. So if you want to launch that poll, we'll see how this one goes. I'm sure everybody's
So
very eager to find this one out. Yeah, Mike.
yeah, but is the myth that they get in the ears, or is it the myth that their intention is to get to the brain?
Well, we'll see. Feel free to interpret that however you want, everyone. All right, so we're going to end the poll there and we'll share the results. Okay, so 96% of people say it's a myth, percent of people say it's a fact. And this is, luckily, most people got this right. This is a myth. So earwigs do not preferentially enter ears and brains. However, there's always a chance a small insect can climb into somebody's ear accidentally, and there have been documented cases of this happening. Unfortunately, the most common insect to climb in people's ears is a cockroach, but I'm sure you're all happy to hear that. But it doesn't also happen very often in the ear, things climbing in the ears. Now, why might people think this too? So the myth might be related to earwigs being highly thigmotactic, which is one of my favorite words. It means thigmotaxis is basically the orientation toward touching surfaces or in between tight spaces. So they really like to be in these tight spaces. And you can see these earwigs hiding in a flower here. They really don't like to be out in the open. And so this might be where it comes from. Also, just the general look. They look scary. They've got these pincers, these pincer-like cerci on the back that they use to hunt and whatnot. They look scary. So I think people think the worst, that they're going to climb in an ear and use those pincers somehow to get into the brain. I should say that earwigs are lovely creatures. They are good mothers. Here's a mother guarding her eggs. They are important beneficials for being predators and decomposers, and even can be found on flowers and feeding on pollen. But where did this name also come from? So earwig, is obviously makes it seem like there's an association. And so Mike was kind enough to find some entries. So according to the Oxford English Dictionary, the earliest known use of the noun earwig is the Old English period pre-1150. A more recent quote from 1601 is translation by Pliny and is worth mentioning. So if an earwig or such like vermin be gotten into the ear, make no more ado, but spit into the same, and it will come forth anon. Which I don't think that's our current remedy for getting things out of the ear, to spit in people's ears, but apparently Pliny thought that was the good thing to do. And it's long been known that for the affinity for the human ear is a myth. Here's a quote from 1870. The earworm, Forficula auricula, is so much dreaded by people, occasions no special danger. So these are not harmful insects. All right. So let's move on to the next one. Cold winters mean less bugs the following spring and summer. So let's launch that poll. All right. I'll give this about 10 more seconds. This one's a tight one. All right, we're going to end the poll there, and we're going to share the results. Okay, so we got 44% of people thinking it's a myth, and 56% of people saying it's a fact. All right, this one is a tough one, and basically it is a myth. So insects respond to cold temperatures in different ways, but those that live in the climates that can get cold generally survive fine over even harsh winters. So here in North Carolina, we did have a very cold winter this past year, but once the insects that overwinter a certain stage get into that stage, physiologically they're pretty tough, and it doesn't matter if it remains a cold winter or not. I would say fluctuations are more important. And also, even when it does affect populations, sometimes it affects the predators and parasites of those pests that can cause pests to go unchecked. So it's really difficult to make generalize what's going to happen. And really, we talk about climate change and things like that affecting when things emerge, when things are active, all that stuff. But just because it's cold out doesn't mean, okay, all these insects are going to die, because they are adapted to overwinter in freezing temperatures. And so typically they're adjusted. It's like plants, in the fall, they start to get ready for the winter and they're dormant, and then they become active in the spring. So not a one-to-one kind of cause and effect here.
Matt, let me ask
Yes.
a follow-up on that. Would the answer depend on whether it was kind of on the edge of its range of adaptability?
It could be, but I have a feeling that the things that are adapted to it are a little bit more adapted will survive and reproduce. Unfortunately, we don't have enough studies of every single species out there and what the changing climate does to them. I would also think that, a cold winter and then a warm period and then a long cold period again could actually kill some things that come out of the dormancy, just like it does with plants as well. But you can't just say it is a cold winter, so everything's going to be dead. We're not going to have as much. In fact, I find it to be when we have good winters where there is cold cooling and the insects aren't awake and alive and wasting energy and stuff like that, we tend to see maybe even more or regular kind of type of populations of insects. Now, and don't quote me exactly on that because every species is different. So yeah.
And we do have a great follow-up question in chat, but unless this is a question you're about to ask. So the follow-up is, why do we say warmer winters will increase pest populations? So if we say colder winters won't decrease, why will warmer winters increase?
And I don't think that's either the case. And in fact, I think that is warmer winters aren't as good sometimes for insects because they aren't going into the regular cycle. It's more the unpredictability, I think, and what insects are now adapted to it, which survived, which now bred, and they're passing on their genes for cold tolerance, things like that. So it's a very complicated thing. This is kind of one that I wasn't super, this is one that I was maybe going to leave out, but just people think that if it's really cold, it's going to kill all these things when it's not always the case, basically. And more often, I don't think it is. So, all right, on to the next one. It's illegal to kill praying mantises.
I can't say I've ever heard that one.
That's really interesting
It's one
because
out there.
I heard it a lot when I was younger, and whether that's true or not, could be. All right, we'll give it about 5, 10 more seconds. All right, I am going to end the poll there. Okay, and we have 72% of people think it's a myth and 28% of people think it's a fact. Okay, so this is a myth. So it is not illegal to kill praying mantises. I put this here because, I guess we gotta send this female praying mantis to jail since she killed this male mantis here. But no, it is a myth. And in fact, several of the larger species are not even native to the US. So the large ones that you find most of the time are going to be Chinese or Japanese mantises. The native ones are the smaller Carolina mantids with these very shorter wings, the more kind of blotchy patterns on them. They come in green and brown. So even then it was never illegal to kill even the native species. And so I did hear this. My little story is that I was playing over a friend's house when I was little. Everybody in the neighborhood knew I love bugs, and some kids came rushing up on their bikes saying, "Matt, there's a dead mantis on the road. Somebody ran it over. We need to figure out who it is and kind of put them in jail." And so that was kind of an interesting misconception. And I knew that even back then that most of the mantises we have are non-native, or at least the large ones that most people see. So interesting. We should do a map at some point on where these myths, who's ever heard of these myths. It'd be really interesting. But
Yeah.
okay. Well, on to the next one.
Black walnut trees kill other plants. Myth or fact? And also separately I have a thing I want to do with this too in a moment.
Okay, let me know when you. Oh, you're gonna end it. You're gonna end it.
Yeah, I can end it. We got a really, out of 261 folks on it, almost 200 have already answered. So we got great participation here.
Great.
But we're going to end it there and share the result. 37% say myth, 63% say fact. Now, next slide, please. So as it turns out, this is a fact. Black walnut trees, and to a lesser extent, some of the relatives, produce a compound called juglone. It's most concentrated in the buds, in the nut hulls, and in the roots. And this is toxic to other plants. So allelopathy, I believe, is the term that when a plant is producing compounds to inhibit competition. And the toxic effects of a mature black walnut tree can extend 50 to 80 feet from the trunk of the tree, with the greatest toxicity occurring within the tree's drip line. Now, this is not universal. Some things are quite sensitive to juglone. So in your vegetable garden, your solanaceous plants, for example, the peppers, eggplants, tomatoes would be on the sensitive side, as well as asparagus. And there are other things, corn, for example, beans, that would be on the insensitive side. And the link to that University of Wisconsin publication that shows a table of sensitive and non-sensitive plants will be helpful for those who do have walnuts. In the interest of time, we're not going to do what I was tempted to put up another poll and say, how many of you have a black walnut in your yard? But I think in order to move forward, we will continue to. Oh, look at that. The plant finder allows you to filter by black walnut resistance. Cool.
That's nice.
Yeah. All right.
All right, great.
There you have it.
All right, let's see what the next one is. Most spiders are venomous. All right, let's see. We got it off to the races. Almost 200 respondents so far. We'll give it another 5 seconds or so. And yeah. All right, I am going to end the poll now and share the results. So we have 81% of people thinking this is a myth and 19% thinking this is a fact. Okay. Well, This is a tricky one, and one I meant to trick you on, kind of. This is true. So almost all spiders that live around you produce venom to immobilize and digest prey, and they can also use it in defense. The most important thing to know about this is that whether the venom is dangerous or not to humans. So the first thing is whether it can be injected, if it has fangs large enough to pierce the skin and inject, and it's toxic enough at the volume injected that it causes medical issues. So we distinguish between dangerously venomous because almost all spiders have venom. Now, there are a couple exceptions. This Ulaborid spider is one of the few local families that does not have venom, but just about every spider you encounter produces venom to take down prey, digest it, and sometimes in defense, especially when it's against smaller attackers. But whether it's dangerous to humans is the other key. And so we do have two dangerously venomous spiders groups in North Carolina. So recluse spiders, the Loxosceles species, and widow spiders, Latrodectus species. So again, most spiders are venomous. Whether they're dangerously venomous is very infrequent because we only have a couple that are dangerously venomous here. So just thinking about the kind of nuance of these types of questions as well. Okay. All right, neem oil is the best way to control arthropod pests when needing an organic compound. Load that poll. All right, let's see. We are getting up there. This is going to be a fun one too. Okay, let's give it a couple more seconds. All right, we are going to end the poll there. We're going to share the results. So we have 44% of people thinking it's a myth and 56% of people thinking it's fact. Okay, this one's a little nuanced, and I put this in here for a particular reason, and that is that it is kind of a myth, well, some other myth. So oils themselves can suffocate and kill insects. They don't need the neem component. And neem is a chemical that is derived from the neem tree and is a chemical called azadirachtin. It can be toxic and repellent to insects, and it has low toxicity to mammals. So that's why it can be really good and whatnot. It is highly toxic to aquatic creatures, though. And really, the myth is that it's a magic bullet and should replace other horticultural oils. And I bring this up because I feel like, unfortunately, a lot of people latch onto the name neem and they think it sounds cool and it sounds like, it's going to be this cool control, this thing that's going to kill everything. But when you look at it in the NC State Extension publications, when you search for neem, you get 46 results among the fact sheets. Whereas if you just search horticultural oil, you get 392 results. So almost 10 times as many results just when you look at horticultural oil. So I'm just encouraging people, neem isn't bad. It's not, dangerous or anything like that, but don't just go to it because it sounds cool, because regular horticultural oils that don't have that active chemical in it are just as good and better in many ways. And in fact, anecdotally, I've heard from some people that neem isn't as good as just a straight up horticultural oil, which is basically like an inert oil that can be in a liquid and sprayed onto things. So I just want people to be out there not thinking about these things a little bit more and not saying, neem sounds cool, I'm going to use it, that's going to go spray on my things and it's going to kill everything. So that was more my misconception than a myth necessarily.
Better, Matt.
Yes.
Myth, fact, neem oil is toxic to bees.
I don't know. I have to read about it. It says it's good for beneficials, but kills the pests. I'm always wondering when it says that because they're not very different. And so I'd love to see a lot of the trials. I just think, again, just do a little bit of research more. Don't grab it just because it sounds cool. Regular horticultural oils are really good and they don't affect bees or things like that. They're a contact pesticide, basically, and they suffocate the, soft-bodied insects, things like that. So, yeah. And is neem more toxic to beneficials than horticulture? So basically, neem has that extra, it's an oil and it has that extra toxin from a plant-derived toxin. So it is technically organic, but basically it's a thing where I think people reach for that, and you don't necessarily need to. And again, when you go based on the advice from these fact sheets, you rarely see neem, but you see horticultural oil much more. So it just gets me when I hear people automatically go into neem rather than just saying, okay, why don't you just use a regular horticultural oil? And people don't even know that they exist. So yeah. Okay. Let's see. All right. If you find ambrosia beetles in your plants, you must prune them out and burn the material. All right. It just happens to be there's a lot of myths about critters, but there's going to be some with Mike is going to give us some others too. So, all right. So we'll give it another couple seconds and we will end the poll now. Okay. All right. So looks like 70% myth and 30% fact are saying. So in this case, it is also a myth. So you will kill those beetles that are inside, but that won't protect plants from the rest of the beetles flying around the environment. And so people will call me up and say, okay, do I need to destroy this? Do I need to kill these? Do I need to make sure that they're not there? You can if you want to spend the time and resources and whatnot burning that, but there's tons of these beetles out in the environment flying around looking for plants. And the plants they're looking for are usually stressed or dying. And so it's really a plant problem, not a beetle problem. And so you can kill as many of those beetles out in the environment as you want, but as long as the plants are healthy, you're not going to have them. If they're not healthy, you're going to start to get attacked by ambrosia beetles. And these are then a symptom that there's something else killing the plant or stressing it out. So burning them, killing them is not going to do anything to protect your other plants, because if your other plants are happy, they're not going to attract the beetles. If they're unhappy, there are beetles in the environment that will come and attack them. So, yeah. All right, let's see what's next. Oh man, a lot of critter ones. Brown recluses are common in North Carolina. And I guess I answered that they do exist in North Carolina, but are they common or not? All right, I'm going to give this another few seconds. All right, we are going to end the poll there. And I'm going to share the results. So 39% of people think this is a myth, and 61% of people think this is a fact. Okay. So this is a myth. Brown recluses are very rare in the state, native only to the far western tip. So this is a map showing the U.S. and where recluse spiders live. So the brown recluse, the dreaded brown recluse, is this pink color in the middle of the U.S. Missouri and Arkansas are basically the epicenter of recluse diversity, of recluse abundance. And then we have a number of native species that live in the Southwest. But all throughout the East Coast, we really don't, it's almost impossible to find them. Now, that there is some subtlety and not nuance to this, in that there are sporadic populations across the state, and they're only found in human structures and never outdoors. And so we know of buildings, we know of homes that where people have infestations, but their next door neighbors or the people around them will never find them or never see them. And this also includes brown and Mediterranean recluses. So there's a species from Europe that is established, I think, in some downtown buildings in Raleigh and elsewhere. And this can happen anywhere in the US, but the spiders don't spread out from there. So basically what it means is, unless you're in the very far western tip of the state, you're never going to see a brown recluse, and it will be very difficult for you to even find one, even if I were to ask you to go find one. They are very uncommon. So if you know somebody's been bit outdoors or things like that, it's basically did not happen. And just so you know how to ID a recluse spider, so recluse spiders have 6 eyes arranged in 3 pairs. They often, although sometimes it's light, have this violin shape or fiddle shape on their head. They'd have no other patterns on their body or legs. The legs lack thick spines. They just have these fine hairs. They don't have these thorn-like spines on the legs. And they're never sitting inside a web or really outdoors. And I'll share a link with you afterward for another site to show you how to identify them. But basically, most of you in North Carolina will never encounter a recluse in your entire life. So just be aware. All right. Looks like another one of mine, it sounds like. Mike, you having fun hanging out there?
Oh yeah, I'm just watching things come through the chat and
Yeah.
following links that Charlotte is sending, and remembering how I was afraid of brown recluses when I first moved to North Carolina, thinking that I saw them in the greenhouse here. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, you never know, but we always want to identify. But for the most part, you're never going to see one, I'm sure. In fact, it was 12 years before I saw one here. So, okay, so launch the poll. Plastic bags filled with water and sometimes also coins will repel flies. I'm curious how many people have heard of this one too, because I'd heard of it and I know Mike had heard of it. So, all right, we're going to see if it is true or not. All right, hopefully everyone's enjoying this too. You're not being too hard on yourselves if you get these wrong. All right, we're going to end it there and we're going to launch, share the poll. So, okay, so 90% of people think it's a myth, 10% of people think it's a fact. Okay, let's see where you're at. Okay, well, here Mike was documenting he actually recently saw it in practice, people hanging up these bags of water, plastic bags of water, and that is a somewhat common thought that if you hang these up it will help keep flies out of that zone or away from things. Of course, these are food servers, so they don't want the flies there, and you can understand why. But if you want to know more, all you have to do is look up on Mythbusters YouTube page. This is a short video. It's only about 10 minutes long. You feel free to go look at it. But what they did was they actually tested this myth. And apparently they said that at the time that they put this video out, that it was the most requested myth ever. And so that seems kind of interesting. So it must mean that people have heard of it. So what they did was they built this structure where they raised a bunch of flies in the center and they put equal amounts of meat in both sides, on either side, and then a water bag on one of them, and then open those center doors. And here's what they did. There's those flies in the middle. They released them. And in fact, they observed the flies even landing and pooping on the bag. And in the end, they weighed the dead flies in both sections after a certain amount of time. And they found out that there were way more flies even in the one that had the bag than the non-bag one. Not that it's attracting them, but it's just showing that it doesn't repel them. So they busted that myth. So this is a busted myth. It is not a thing. Don't waste your time filling bags of water or wasting plastic and putting them out there to repel flies. All right, next one.
So plants that are labeled as disease resistant cannot get sick from pathogens. Myth or fact? So I don't think you can see how the numbers are running, but one side of this is just taking it far ahead of the other. I think this is the most lopsided poll in the history of PP&P polls. I'm going to end it here and share the results. So 95% say myth, 5% say fact. And you don't need me here. Yes, this is a myth, and it's actually doubly so. So I'm going to give you two reasons why this is not true. Counterexample one is when you're considering different diseases. So this is a piece of a table out of the IPM shrub book and from the chapter on shrub roses. And you'll notice that for different cultivars of rose, there's the susceptibility to 3 different diseases. So gourmet popcorn susceptible to black spot but resistant to cercospora leaf spot and powdery mildew, whereas heart and soul susceptible to black spot, cercospora leaf spot, resistant, powdery mildew resistant. You can see the different patterns there. So just because it is resistant to one disease does not mean it is resistant to another. My second counterexample, and the second reason why this is false, has to do within a particular disease when we have resistance. So basically, when resistance is based on a single gene in the host plant, there will be some variants of the pathogen that will be able to overcome that, and eventually those are the ones that become, reproduce, and so you get the buildup of these resistant strains. We call them races, and they're usually given numbers. And so here's a case for tomato, Fusarium wilt in tomato, a piece of a table from the 2026 Vegetable Crop Handbook for the Southeast. And you'll notice the footnotes 6, 7, 8, and 8A are to indicate resistance to Fusarium wilt races 0, 1, 2, and 3. And if you click it once more, you can see how some are resistant to none, some are resistant to, or one there on this part of the list is resistant to a single race, others to 2 out of the 4, and others to 3 out of the 4. And there's actually a race 4 out there as well, which I guess I take it from the fact that it doesn't show up in this table that there's no resistance to it, but don't quote me on that. So basically, even things that are supposed to be resistant to a particular disease may not be resistant to all races of the pathogen.
All right. Thanks, Mike. All right. Related to the previous one, brown paper bags hung up will deter social wasps, as in hornets and yellow jackets and paper wasps and things like that. Okay, we're gonna keep tight on time this time with the last couple. So we'll do it at
I've been having so much fun, I've completely lost track of time.
I know. We're having a lot of fun. Well, maybe everybody else will be having fun and they'll want to stay on a little longer. So, okay. So we're going to end the poll there and let's share the results. So 74% of people think this is a myth and 26% of people think it's a fact. So this one, so just to give you some context, there's lots of instructions and whatnot out there showing how to make a brown paper bag, basically brown paper bag stuffed with some newspaper or other brown paper bags hung up will deter wasps from building nests nearby. You can even apparently buy them on Amazon to hang up. They're very pretty and cool and whatever. But do they work? Well, no, probably. They may scare off some wasps due to them being territorial, but clearly not all of them. You can see this reviewer on that one Amazon post showed a paper wasp building its nest within the paper nest here. And also some colleagues have commented online that this actually could backfire in that it provides paper for them to chew for them to make their own nests. So I would say it's probably not worth your time. Try it if you want. The brown paper bags are not expensive, so you can try it. And they're also compostable, so it's not a big deal, but doesn't seem to be the case out there. Okay, cutting up hammerhead and other flatworms causes each part to grow into a new worm. All right, let's see. As these go, I'm checking some of and I will respond to some of the comments after this. So there's been some good back and forth and everything. All right, we're going to end the poll now. All right, let's share the results. Ooh, this is a close one. This one is 47% myth, 53% fact. Ooh. So, and I did see a comment and said, please don't tell me this is true. And yeah, we got to include some true ones here too. So this is true, in fact, true. So most flatworms, sometimes called planarians, can regrow an entire new animal from a small portion of the previous animal. Here's a great diagram up here. If you cut, say, this one into a few pieces, the middle part will grow a head and tail. The head will grow a tail. The tail will grow a head. You cut it down the middle, it may grow 3 heads. And so the land planarians do the same thing. So don't cut up or smash hammerhead worms or other planarians because you'll only make more. And more information can be found on our flatworm or hammerhead worm fact sheet. We'll link later. But it is amazing. They're doing a lot of research on this because it's such an amazing property of these animals. I mean, really kind of strange too. And it's a way that they asexually reproduce as well by budding, they'll break and do this. So don't just chop them up, don't crush them. But I will also say, with the based on the fact sheet and things like that, these are not necessary to go kill and destroy. They're not going to cause much harm out there. But anyway, really weird animals. So yeah. All right, Mike.
So mushrooms.
Mike, before you go, Matt, is that true of regular worms?
That is,
No, right?
I don't think that's
Okay.
true of regular worms like earthworms.
Yeah.
So earthworms are a
Right.
completely different type of worm than flatworms.
Yeah.
So as far as I know, it's flatworms is very common for happen. I think earthworms, I don't think they can grow. They definitely can't grow from multiple pieces cut up. They may be able to grow like a tail or something like that, or a part, but I don't know that exactly, but it's not well known in them, let's just say.
Yeah. Rhonda, who was our worm specialist, says no. If you cut a regular earthworm in half, you've killed it. So
Yeah,
don't try
basically.
to multiply the number of worms in your garden by cutting them into multiple pieces, thinking you're going to get lots more worms.
Thanks, Lucy. That's a great thing. Yeah, but you can do it with the hammerhead worms if you want more of them. So, all right. So, Mike.
So yes, mushrooms bad for plants. True or false? Myth or fact? I think we now have the second most lopsided poll in the history of polls in plant pests and pathogens. Although again, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So yes, 93% myth. And it's a bit nuanced, actually. I would classify this as a myth, but let me just show you a few examples to give you the gamut of what we're dealing with when we see mushrooms. And again, when we see the mushroom, we're only seeing the part of the fungus that's developed to produce spores, right? The main body of the fungus, the part that's actually deriving its nutrition from something, is the fine network of hyphae, these little tube-like filaments that compose the main body of the fungus. That said, let's just look at a few examples here. So an example of one that's harmful to plants indirectly would be some of our fairy ring fungi, mushrooms or puffballs, where because it's only decomposing the fat, so it's not parasitizing the plants, but it can cause local, I believe it's by way of causing hydrophobic soil in the ring, and you can get some short-term effects of damage to turf there. So this is one, it's not a parasite, but it could cause some secondary damage. Compare that to armillaria, in this case, Des armillaria, which is our only true mushroom, and by that a fleshy fungus. We're not talking about the conchs here now, but a fleshy fungus with gills. That our only true mushroom that is a plant pathogen in North Carolina, our armillaria and Des armillaria. So this is a potential problem for our trees and shrubs. Compare that to something like Leucocaprinus birnbaumii, the yellow parasol mushroom, which sometimes pops up in flower pots, or it can pop up in a flower bed as well. This is a decomposer, and it may cause alarm when it shows up in your flower pot, but the only damage it would do, and this is only potential, I'm not sure it's been documented, that if you get a lot of it in the pot, the soil could become hydrophobic. And then as a final example, this is a Russula species as a representative of the many mushrooms that are mycorrhizal, so are actually beneficial, associated with tree roots and helping in their nutrition. So mutualism there. So when you see a mushroom, certainly don't automatically assume that it's a problem for your plants, but keep in mind that it could have a wide variety of types of interactions. So I can't get a definitive answer yet. I don't know if that was directed at this particular question, but there is not a definitive answer, but basically you need not always assume that mushrooms are going to be damaging to plants.
I think that may have been related to the question about if mushrooms are harmful to dogs.
Oh, yes, there are some data on that. I don't have it right at the tip of my fingertips to share, but yeah, some Certainly there are some mushrooms that are more associated with toxicity in dogs, but it's not as well documented as human, poisoning.
All right. Well, thanks, Mike. All right, let's see. Let's move on to the next one. Daddy longlegs are the most venomous spiders, but their fangs are too short to bite you. All right, let's see. Is this a myth or is this fact? All right. Give this about 10 more seconds. I'm looking forward to answering some of these questions and whatnot. Okay, we're going to end the poll there. We're going to share it. Actually, pretty close. So this is 59% myth, 41% fact. Okay. So what is the answer? Well, a myth, but for various reasons and for various reasons. And the first thing is, what are we talking about when we say daddy longlegs? So the first thing I think of are harvestmen. So is this the daddy longlegs that you're talking about? Well, if that's the case, these long-legged kind of ball with legs, then they're called harvestmen. They're opiliones. They are not actually spiders. You can see that their body is one huge kind of part. It's not divided up into an abdomen and a cephalothorax, or head and abdomen. So these are not spiders. They don't have fangs. In fact, their mouth parts are more like claws or little scrapers, and they use that to kind of manipulate food, and they're omnivores. So they have no fangs, no venom, and they're not spiders. So that is not the case with these. Now, you might call these daddy longlegs, these cellar spiders, these long-legged spiders in homes often, or in garages, places like that. Again, cellar spiders, these are true spiders in the family Falcidae. They rarely bite and are only mildly venomous. And really, they're just big scaredy cats, I would say. They, if you go near them, they usually shake their web violently to scare you away because they're afraid, because they don't want to get eaten. And I've never heard of anybody being bitten by one of these. They like to flee. And I've heard even bites that do happen are basically almost painless and resolve very quickly. So there's no truth really to that myth. There's nothing, just because these things look like they can't bite or whatever doesn't mean that they're kind of underlying, there's some underlying high toxicity to them. So yeah, all of them are basically harmless.
So this one I got from I'll just say someone known through the family. I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody, but eggshells scattered on the ground around tomato plants will prevent blossom end rot in the fruit. So a myth or fact? All right. I'm going to go ahead and end it there. Share those results. And again, a fairly lopsided response, 85% myth, 15% fact. Now, this is a case where, yes, a myth, but let's go a little bit background, because we want to understand why some people might be attracted to that. Of course, blossom end rot being a localized calcium deficiency in the developing fruit. But calcium it's got this pathway. It's got to be in the soil, and the plant has to take it up and move it to the fruit. And then even, I just read this recently as I was preparing this, even within the cell, it has to be in the right place. So you could have, in theory, enough calcium in the cell, but not in where it's going to help the cell walls. So it's a rather complicated pathway to get there. And eggshells, of course, having calcium, that's true, it would be an attractive thought as to some way of preventing this. I was going to say remedy. But when I posed this question to horticulture science professor Chris Gunter several years ago, next slide, he had this response. When I think of supplying supplemental calcium to eliminate blossom end rot in developing tomatoes, I usually think save your money. There's almost always sufficient soil calcium present, depending, right? And when a calcium deficiency occurs, it's usually caused by a lack of movement of calcium to the roots via the water soil water. So it's the matter of making sure that you have good uptake that would be at hand. But even so, the eggshells, they're not going to, that calcium is not going to be immediately completely available, right? So you've got a small amount of calcium slowly being available there and probably not going to make a difference in a single season. I did see, but couldn't find any good substantiation of it, the thought that ground up eggshells applied foliarly or to the soil could help, but I would want to see some more data to back that up before I would try it. Certainly, yes, toss them into your compost, make good use of them, but as a remedy for blossom end rot, just sprinkling around the tomato plants, it is not going to be beneficial or not going to cure your problem. I'll just say that it's not going to hurt.
All right. Thanks, Mike. All right. Well, actually, we don't have any wrap-up slide, and that was it. So I'm going to stop sharing now, but hopefully everyone had fun with that, and we don't care how you did. You're not getting graded for this. You're not going to get kicked out or whatever if you didn't do well on this thing. But hopefully you had fun. You maybe changed your mind about a few things. Any other follow-ups that you want to say, Mike?
How are we doing on time? Do we have time to look at the chat?
Yeah. Do you want me to look at the chat while you do bolos and vice versa, or how do we want to do this?
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll go
Yeah,
ahead
if you want to start, since there are probably some more for me to look at. If you want to start with the bolos, I can start answering some chat questions,
will do.
and then vice versa. So
Okay. All right. So a few plant disease bolos for this period of time now from late June to late July. Obviously have to be selective because we are in the peak season now in the mid and late summer for our plant diseases, but here are a few things to be on the lookout for. In the tree and shrub category, our slime flux is something we see in the heat of the summer. It's the external manifestation of a condition called wet wood in the interior. And this frothy, fermented smelling material comes out. Very common on white oaks, in which case it's usually very low, close to the ground like this. It can occur on some other hardwoods. It can occur farther up the trunk as well. But it's not a dangerous condition. It will sometimes attract a lot of insects, but the wetwood in itself is not really a disease. So there's no remedy needed. May flux some years, may not flux in others. Resist the temptation to, drive pipes in there or do anything like that. So something just to kind of be on the lookout. You will no doubt get questions about it in the coming months. Powdery mildews, another thing that'll be common in the summer. We see them especially on crepe myrtles, on dogwoods, euonymus, the Leucothrui, rose, and spirea. So those will be some of the common hosts, but there will be others. And many trees and shrubs will be suffering from abiotic problems or misuse on our part, the gardener, poorly planted or that were root bound or have girdling roots, herbicide injury. We continue to see those kind of cases coming into the clinic. And of course, for those of us who still need more rain, drought stress, if we don't get more rain, is something to be on the lookout for as well. Bacterial leaf scorch will be showing itself. Now, I haven't looked for the symptoms on the elm that I know, or the elms that I know are infected, but they tend to show up a little bit sooner. But for our oaks and our red buds, now this time of year is going to be the onset of the scorch type symptoms. These trees are chronically infected. It's a xylem inhabiting bacterium, and the symptoms will disappear when the leaves drop off, obviously, and then they'll leaf out just fine in the spring, but then midsummer they will show symptoms again. In the vegetable garden, multiple species of plants. Be on the lookout for the possibility of root knot nematodes causing wilting and southern stem blight. You can see that in the picture on the upper right there, the mycelium. You may also see the small sclerotia that look like little radish seeds when they're mature, causing stem rot on different species of plants. Just a few quick looks at our popular tomatoes, nutritional problems such as magnesium deficiency. You see there in the photograph in the lower left. Blossom end rot we talked a little bit about in the myths section. Our leaf spots, either bacterial leaf spot, septoria leaf spot, and tomato spotted wilt. I'll show a few pictures in the next slide there. And our wilt, so root knot nematode causing wilting, tomato bacterial wilt, southern blight, which would be the southern stem blight, same thing. In the cucurbits, powdery mildews, especially on squash and pumpkin. Downy mildews, I always mention as a be on the lookout in June. Interestingly enough, even though at this late date, we have not yet had any reports of it in North Carolina on cucurbits. It does not overwinter here. It's been reported in Florida. It was able to overwinter there, but we haven't seen it move up here yet. I wouldn't be surprised if the dry weather is part of that, but it also may have to do with winds, and maybe the winds just aren't bringing it up this direction. But that's a question I'm not able to answer, but do be on the lookout. It could show up at some point this summer. Anthracnose, another disease of cucurbits, and gummy stem blight, especially watermelon. Here are a few photos of some specific tomato problems. Septoria leaf spot, it's going to be on the lower foliage first and work its way up, whereas tomato spotted wilt virus, we've seen a lot of this year. And there you will see spotting even on the very young foliage that's coming out, because as a virus, it's systemic, and you can see it causing some pretty interesting fruit symptoms as well. Southern bacterial wilt, one of the diseases that cause our tomatoes to look very droopy like the one on the right. Among our fruits, we've got brown rot, which will start coming on when peaches begin to actually ripen, whereas scab is going to be a little bit earlier, and you get this multiple spots that can coalesce and cause the fruit to crack when the fruit tries to expand. So that's brown rot on the left, scab on the right. With apple, on our apple leaves, cedar apple rust and frog eye leaf spot would be two things to look out for on the fruit. Black rot, bitter rot, sooty blotch, and fly speck would be some of the things to be aware of. Cane blight in blackberries. On our bunch grapes, black rot as a fruit disease, and downy mildew, different from the downy mildew on our cucurbits. And muscadine grape gets black rot as a leaf spot, not so much as a fruit rot. Turf grasses, brown patch, when our cool season grasses are stressed, then they're going to be more prone to brown patch. Fairy ring on any kind of turf grasses, gray leaf spot on fescue and St. Aug, Pythium blight, summer patch, and chinch bugs would be things to also keep aware of on our turf grasses here as we go into the month of July. As always, need more BOLOs, want more BOLOs? We got more BOLOs on our webpage there. Follow the icon at the lower portion of our main page, pdic.ces.ncsu.edu.
All right, thanks, Mike. All right, I'm gonna share some critter bolos, and Mike maybe can answer some questions or whatnot, and I'll keep going through afterward while Ariyah and Charlotte are presenting at the end part. So let's see. Share. Okay, let's talk about a few real quickly, some arthropod bolos for late June, early July. So cicadas are coming out. I'm starting to hear them a little bit. I asked Mike the other day, he heard them earlier. And so they're going to start to become more abundant. It's going to be a lot louder out. And with them come the cicada killers. And in fact, I saw the males here by our building on a patch that they really enjoy, the Tenestin, all the cicada killers. The cicada killer males are coming out. They seem aggressive and erratic, but that's because they're all jazzed up to fight each other to get good territories, to mate with the females and kind of produce offspring. And so if they seem overly aggressive, they're all wrestling with each other. I got a really nice video I probably should have shown, and maybe I can send it afterward. But yeah, they were all fighting with each other. But even though they're large, they are harmless to humans. We're going to start to see full-grown wheel bugs and other bugs out there. There's some large leaf-footed bugs and whatnot. Note that if you see this bug with a big cog or a big buzzsaw on its back, don't touch it or don't hold it, but just note it from a distance. It's not going to jump at you or hurt you, but they can give a nasty jab. But they can be also very beneficial predators out there in the gardens. We're going to start to see fall webworms increasing. At least the webs are going to start to increase and grow on the trees. So just be aware of them, as well as lots of other garden caterpillars. So cabbage worms, squash vine borers, everything's basically active, starting to be active right now, out and about. I mentioned Japanese beetles last time, but also June beetles are going to be starting to emerge, even though June is just about to end. They seem to be a little bit more late in the season anyway. Typically, we see them around July or so. But these fast flying beetles will fly around fields and whatnot where their larvae live underground, and they can actually break into figs and soft bodied fruits like peaches and things like that to get to the sugary, rich flesh of those fruits. And so be aware that if your fruits are overripe, they can be broken open by some of these beetles. You can see that kind of that horn on the nose, they'll just dig right into it. And of course, many other critters are getting bigger. So you're going to start to see more of the garden spiders. You're going to start to see more of the praying mantises. You may see some Joro spiders. I'm not going to mention specifically, but this is the time where we're going to start to see the red nymphs and the adults of spotted lanternfly as well. So be on the lookout for these arthropods. And if you aren't sure what you're seeing out there, we are happy to help you. If you'd like to submit the photos or specimens to us, we're happy to help you identify what you got out there. All right, I'm going to end it there and stop sharing.
Okay, I am going to start sharing our Plant These for Pathogens. Well, I've got it up on my screen, but I did not share it yet. Hold on just one second. There we go. Okay. Thank you so much, Matt and Mike. As you can see by all the comments in the chat, that was fascinating. I know we all learned something, challenged some things we thought that were true, and that was just a really great way to cover a lot of content and make it so engaging. So we're going to move on to our Plant These for Pollinators. And of course, this is a regular feature of Plants, Pests, and Pathogens, where we talk about great plants to support our native bees, honeybees, butterflies, flies, other pollinators. Actually, flies are our second most effective group of pollinators after our bees. So when we talk about pollinators, it's important to think about all the insects out there that are doing that important work. And they all need plants. They all need flowers, nectar, pollen, or some of them for some of their life cycles are actually feeding on pests that are on the plants. So plants are a critical part of supporting our pollinators, and we want to have a diversity of plants in our landscapes. We want to have things in bloom throughout the growing season. And that is what our Plant These for Pollinators is aiming to do, encouraging you to have this diversity of plants and focusing on some of the real power plants for our pollinators. And this month, we're going to talk about Rudbeckia, a couple of different species. There's quite a few species of Rudbeckia. They have several common names that include things like black-eyed Susan, orange coneflower, green-headed coneflower. So we're going to look at a few of these specific ones. But as a group, Rudbeckia are summer blooming, mostly perennials, although there's some annuals and some short-lived perennials, biennials. They are, as a genus, from North America, with several species occurring in the Southeast, including North Carolina. As with many members of the aster family, Rudbeckia attract a real diversity of pollinators, and this includes several pollen specialist bees. So there's some bees out there that focus more on a small group of plants, and it's always great to include some of those types of plants as well as some of the, having again that diversity of plants. So you have things in bloom that are feeding both our generalist bees, which aren't so picky, and our specialist bees, which are looking for specific types of pollen. So in addition to our pollinators, the bees and butterflies and other insects that'll visit Rudbeckias, they are also a great resource for birds. The seed heads, if you leave those on, you will likely see goldfinches and other songbirds visiting them. I often find, because these Rudbeckias have such bright yellow flowers, similar in color to goldfinches, you may not even realize they're there until you see the plant kind of moving a little bit and you look closer and there'll be a goldfinch up there collecting seed. So on this slide, I have featured a couple of the more short-lived species. These are great plants for quick color, like you want something very fast growing and, something more temporary, although they will both self-seed. But they include Rudbeckia triloba, which is known as the brown-eyed Susan. That's the one pictured up top. It has a smaller flower than the Rudbeckia hirta that you see below, which is more of an annual or short-lived perennial. And they both will self-seed. If you leave those flower heads for the birds, just remember the seeds that they don't eat will be there to grow next year. So that might be an important strategy in your landscape to keep these plants going, to allow them to self-seed, especially in more of a cottage garden, or you may find you need, especially with Rudbeckia hirta, to replant every few years. So let's look at some of the more long-lived perennial species. And first is Rudbeckia, and it's a selected variety Goldstrom. This is a selection of Rudbeckia sullivantii. This one is probably one of the most popular of the perennial Rudbeckias. I think probably because it's shorter. The other couple of species we're going to look at are tall. And this one is shorter, so people feel like, it's more approachable, it's more manageable, it doesn't need to be staked. It's very long blooming. They're just starting to bloom now. I think in years aren't quite so dry. I think the drought has set back the bloom starting on this a little bit this year. So usually it starts sometime in June and can go on through September. And the blossoms do attract many butterflies and bees and other pollinators. It is very tough and adaptable. It does best and blooms most prolifically in sun and moist soil that is also well drained. But generally it is one that is pretty adaptable and will bloom quite decently even in part shade. When it is in bloom, it reaches about 2 feet tall, maybe a little bit more. It does spread by short rhizomes, so it's not going to pop up, feet away from the main plant. It's just kind of like a little spreading carpet, which makes it easy to divide after a few years. You'll also get seedlings coming up if the seed heads are left. It is also one nice feature about it is it has fairly evergreen foliage. So in the winter, that little carpet of low green leaves is there. So just provides some winter presence. It doesn't completely disappear. But one thing to be aware of, it is one deer-like. So because I think it's lower as well, it's really easy for them to feed on the blossoms. So if you have a lot of deer, this might not be a good choice for you. And I'm sure Mike would love me to point out it's also susceptible to some leaf spot diseases that can be quite severe in wetter conditions. And typically those aren't really in a landscape setting the plant back so much, but it can be a aesthetic concern. This Goldstrom which actually means gold storm, is a very apt name because of the just many golden flowers it produces, is one of several named varieties of Rudbeckia sullivantii and Rudbeckia fulgida, which are two very similar looking species that occur in the eastern United States. And in fact, this was formerly listed as a cultivar of Rudbeckia fulga variety sullivantii. So the botanists like to have fun moving plants around on us a little bit. So if you're looking at it thinking, that's not quite the name I'm familiar with it having, maybe you're more familiar seeing it listed as Rudbeckia fulgida. So this is a great one, very readily available. And if you know somebody who has some, they'll probably happy to share some with you as well. The next one is Rudbeckia herbston. And it's another summer bloomer. It's another one that's just starting to bloom now. And this one, particularly in my landscape, will just be covered in pollinators. They're just moving so quickly all over it. A whole variety of bees, skippers, butterflies, flies, just really interesting diversity of insects that'll be on it. The one, drawback is it is quite tall, but it is pretty strong, and in full sun, it does tend to stand up quite well. If you get a really heavy thunderstorm, that can knock it down. So I would recommend some staking, especially if you're in a site that gets a little bit of shade. Shade will kind of make those stems a little weaker. So staking can help it stand up, especially through like downpours. Not that we're experiencing a lot of those this summer. It does grow best in sun. And again, that moist, well-drained soil, what doesn't grow good in moist, well-drained soil, right? But it does have good drought tolerance. And I've been quite surprised this summer, particularly how well it's holding up. though the drought does again seem to have delayed the flowering a bit. It's also sometimes called autumn sun, which is the translation of the German cultivar name. So in Europe, I think it is later blooming for them, whereas for us, it's starting to bloom right now. And this one has a little bit of a kind of mysterious parentage. It is sometimes sold, you'll see it sold as Rudbeckia nitida, which is a species of Rudbeckia native to Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. Other times you might see it listed as a cultivar of Rudbeckia laciniata, which occurs here in North Carolina and much of the eastern United States. And then there's other thoughts that it's actually a hybrid between the two. Personally, I lean towards it's a hybrid between the two. Based on what I've seen of Rudbeckia laciniata, I don't think this is just a selection of Rudbeckia laciniata. It is much more robust, but it is definitely one the pollinators love. Then last one I want to mention is giant coneflower, Rudbeckia maxima is another one, very similar bloom time through the summer. It's another tall one, a little taller even, 6 to 7 feet tall. But you do see a difference here, whereas the Rudbeckia herbston, you see lots of leaves up the stem. So those leaves kind of add to the weight on the stem and make it a little more likely to fall over in rainstorms. The giant coneflower, you see most of the leaves are on the lower portion of the stem, and then it's kind of naked up at the top part, and they're very strong stems. So this one, certainly you can't say no plant would not be knocked over by a strong enough storm, wind, and heavy rain, but this one is quite a dependable one for its height, for not needing staking to keep it standing. So very strong stems that rise up above these basal rosettes and lower leaflets on the stem that are this blue-green color. So the foliage itself is quite interesting. The flower heads are quite interesting with those really tall cones. It is another one, like these Rudbeckias, it is adaptable and drought tolerant. And both the giant coneflower and the Rudbeckia herbston we just looked at, they are not as often listed as being really susceptible to deer feeding. And I don't know if that's just because deer don't quite like them as much or because of their height. But these, if you've had deer issues with, the Rudbeckia goldstrom, you may be able to get away with some of these taller coneflowers. This one does not naturally occur here in North Carolina, but it grows very well, and it's native to Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. And again, with all of the Rudbeckias, flowers are fabulous for pollinators, but you also want to remember to leave the seed heads for the birds. And here's a great picture from Scott Zona of our plant toolbox of a goldfinch feeding on the seeds of one of the giant coneflowers. All right, another reminder for many of our perennials, especially things like Rudbeckia that have these nice, strong, tall stems with a pithy center, they can provide excellent nesting habitat for stem nesting bees and insects. So when you cut them back in the winter, so, if you leave the seed heads through the fall, that should definitely be sufficient for our birds, and wait until winter, even, after the holidays, and you go to cut them back, leave a 1 to 2 foot stubble. So leave some of the dead stems standing, and that can provide a nesting habitat for some of our native bees that nest inside of stems. They will drill in there and lay their eggs next spring or summer, particularly next summer, and those eggs will then develop into the next generation. So there's a great extension publication called Garden Cleanup for Pollinators that goes into more detail of this. And of course, many Master Gardener volunteers across the state contributed to the research that is discussed in that publication to determine, when the ideal time is to cut the plants back, and also to come up with there's a list of plants in there that stem nesting bees were found to use. You can explore all of these species of Rudbeckia and more in the Plant Toolbox, which is your one-stop shop for everything you need to learn about plants that grow in and around North Carolina. So we will wrap up with a few announcements. Moving ahead, so we do have some continuing education webinars coming up. First, July 14th, Designing Your Garden with Native Plants. We're so happy to welcome Logan Clark with Arrowhead Landscaping to discuss using native plants in the landscape, especially from a design perspective. So we're really looking forward to that. I know there's already a lot of registration, but if you're interested, please register on the EMG intranet. You'll receive the reminder. Also, the Zoom link is posted there. Then in August, on August 11th at 11 o'clock, we have Dr. Kelly Oaten joining us to talk about invasive pests of our forests that potentially could move into our front yards, or actually more likely it is invasive pests of native trees that we also use in our landscapes. So this will be a great time to get an update on some of the invasive species, such as spotted lanternfly and emerald ash borer, that we hear a lot about and want to make sure we are aware of and can identify and understand what's going on with them across our state. So this is another one. You can register on the EMG intranet. And if you're looking to dig into a deeper, you want some deeper course, multiple series of classes, be sure to check out the Gardens, Lawns, and Landscapes online courses, which Dr. Scott Zona, in addition to being our plant toolbox manager, he also is the instructor for these courses. There are 2 starting very soon in July, growing edible plants. So of course that will dig into all of our vegetables and fruits, and would be a great opportunity to deepen your knowledge there. And also landscape materials and design, which is an area many of us would love to learn more and have a better idea of designing our landscapes to be both more attractive, more sustainable. So this would be a great opportunity for that, and a wonderful time of the year just to spend a little time inside, especially in the afternoons, out of the heat, learning and studying. So there'll be more courses starting in the fall. These, of course, are based on the Extension Gardener Handbook, and there is a discount code for Master Gardener volunteers that you can get from your agent. We hope everybody has the Great Southeast Pollinator Census on their calendar for August 21st and 22nd. This will be a wonderful opportunity for you to go out and observe pollinators in your yard, in a local park, in the demonstration garden. You can do it anywhere there's a plant blooming in North Carolina and several other Southeast states, but we encourage you to participate here in North Carolina. And it only takes 15 minutes. You observe the plant, you mark down which pollinators you see visiting, and then you can upload the results to the Great Southeast Pollinator Census website. If you want to brush up on your insect identification knowledge, mark your calendar for July 16th. 1 to 3, there will be a Get to Know the Insects webinar. Matt will actually be one of the speakers, and you can register. It is posted on the EMG intranet. You don't actually register through the EMG intranet, but you will find a link to register there, or you can use the link or QR code seen here on the slide. So that will get you ready. And it's also just a great opportunity to learn more about insect ID. Then there is another webinar closer to the census on August 13th that is Knowledge is Pollinator Power, where we'll hear from some people who are currently working on pollinator research, some of the latest things that are going on in pollinator research and conservation around the country. So that will be a great one just to get excited and, learn about some of the latest findings and how you can support those, because work with community science projects such as the Great Southeast Pollinator Census can provide the data needed for some of these studies. So that's another one that you'll find it listed on the EMG Intranet calendar, but you don't register on the calendar, but the link is there to register, or you can use the QR code seen here. And you can find lots more information on the Great Southeast Pollinator Census in North Carolina website, including if you're planning an event at your site, you can register it. Amanda Bratcher, who is our Extension Horticulture Agent in Lee County, also serves as the state coordinator for the Great Southeast Pollinator Census in North Carolina. It's created lots of wonderful resources to help support you if you are hosting events. She also promotes those, and you'll find some great marketing materials as well. as well as a link I should mention too. There was a webinar earlier back in April on getting ready for the Great Southeast Pollinator Census. So you can find the recording link to that there just to learn a little more and get some background on the census itself. All right, just a few more things to let you know about. NC State Extension and NC State College of Agriculture and Life Science Advancement will be hosting a workshop on August 27th. You will be able to attend both online or in person at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum if you'd like to learn about planned giving. So this one is being called Growing Your Legacy. It is focusing for volunteers with Extension Master Gardener Program and the J.C. Ralston Arboretum. So this is something you can go to the EMG intranet and find the link to sign up. This is another one where you're not registering on the EMG intranet itself on the calendar, but you can find the link there to sign up to get the Zoom link and other more information. So encourage you, if you're interested in learning more about planned giving, to support Extension Master Gardener Program or J.C. Ralston Arboretum, to sign up for this upcoming opportunity and either join us in person at J.C. Ralston Arboretum or join us online at that same date and time. And wrapping things up, we look forward to seeing you all again next month, July 28th, when Dr. Mallory Chowdhury will join us to talk about climate impacts on soil health. She is an extension specialist and assistant professor of microbiology. So she studies the fungi and bacteria and things that live in our soil. And we will learn more about how our changing climate and weather patterns are affecting those and the health of our soil, which is directly connected to the health of our plants. So this is one you can sign up for on the EMG intranet, and we look forward to seeing you back here again next month. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to Matt and Mike for an excellent and very engaging and informative session. And thank you to Ariyah April, as always, for making sure our webinar runs smooth and keeping everybody informed of what's going on.